Okay, a question like this has come up, I think, more than once in the exam. Although in reality, it's unusual for the ambulance service to telephone in this way because they know what to do. This is a cot death. I will go off in a minute and talk about a cot deaths. There's usually about 200 per year in the UK. And obviously, they're incredibly distressing for everyone concerned. And usually, there's no obvious explanation, although there can be. However, it is usual practice for a cot death, unless there's a good reason not to. For example, the baby is clearly decomposed or something like that, which is very incredibly unusual. It's usual practice for the baby to be brought to the hospital. And it's usual practice for resuscitation to begin immediately, even if the baby is clearly dead. That would be usual UK practice for a cot death. And only a senior clinician, such as a consultant, would say, stop. And there's a number of reasons why that's done. One of them, of course, is, resuscitation is a good thing to do, but also it just shows to the family that everything was done, that the hospital tried their best to help the baby. So it's usual to attempt resuscitation unless the baby's clearly been dead for a long time. At the same time, it's normal practice to inform the police. And that's not done by the ambulance crew, that's done by the ambulance control centre. So why do they do that? Well, they do that because we know that among the cot deaths, there are a few that are suspicious. There are a few where there may be non-accidental injury. And so the police want to be aware immediately because they will take particular interest if there has been any history with the family concerned by social services. So if there's been any history of neglect or non-accidental injury or previous cot death or anything like that, or there's any blood at the scene. So the police will almost certainly visit the home and check the circumstances in the home and speak to the family. And also, this will then lead to a post-mortem, of course, and the coroner will be involved, who will almost always organise some form of investigation, which may lead to an inquest in some cases. And I'll just touch on each of what all of those things mean. Let me just go through these options here. So option A is the right one, I think. The baby should come to hospital immediately. B, first of all, it's not appropriate to ask the parents to bring a dead baby in anyway. And secondly, the parents would not be able to just bring in a body and ask for a post-mortem examination. There just isn't a pathway that parents can step into to get that sort of assessment. That would have to come through the emergency department or through the paediatric ward. C, contact the local police immediately. That is half the truth, but it's not the best answer. And I'll say a bit more what an SBA is in a few minutes. So it's partly the truth that police do need to be informed, but it's not the best answer. The public mortuary, well, every area has a mortuary where postmortems are carried out, though often those are in hospitals, but they're not always in hospitals. And that access to those is either from the undertakers, etc., and from GPs or through a hospital. And it's not appropriate for the ambulance crew to take the baby straight there. And similarly, the final option, it's not fair to ask the parents to make this choice. So A is the best option. Let me just say a little bit about the coroners and inquests. So in the UK, there are a series of indications for when a coroner has to be involved in the death. The coroner is basically a judge, he's a legal officer. It's a very ancient institution, and they are involved in deaths. They have a few other responsibilities, but their job is to establish who died, where they died, when they died, and why they died. So that's their job. And so whenever someone dies, information has to go by law to the coroner. And the coroner usually employs some ex-policemen called coroner's officers who will often look at the information. And for example, if it's an elderly person who had multiple medical problems, they may say, that's fine, no need for any more, a death certificate can be issued by the hospital and no more action is required. But in other circumstances where there's any uncertainty about the cause of the death, or there's any suspicion at all about uh, whether if there's anything suspicious, then the coroner will request a post-mortem. And no one can deny that. If the coroner says there has to be a post-mortem, then nobody can refuse that. No family can refuse that. And the post-mortem may establish the cause of death, in which case the coroner might then issue a death certificate. Or if there are still suspicious features, they can organise what's known as an inquest. An inquest is a legal proceeding in a courtroom. There's not usually a jury, it's usually just the coroner that takes charge, in which the evidence is gone through to establish who died, when they died, where they died, and why they died. And that's the job of the coroner. And generally speaking, baby deaths are investigated fairly thoroughly. So they will have a post-mortem, samples will be retained to see if the cause of the death can be established, and so on.